welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessikah. I am here with the author of a really fun book about so many things, and I think it's perfect for people who like their books a little spooky. It's good for people who prefer their books light. It's got everything you can imagine. It's got a little mystery at the heart of it. And is this the beginning of a series?
It sure is. It sure is. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name is Maxie Dara, and Grim Reaper's Guide to Catching a Killer is a cozy mystery comedy with a paranormal twist.
It was really, really good. And it was just kind of a fun supernatural world to play in. And I just kind of wanted to get an idea about where the whole story came from for you. So it's got like one of my favorite tropes that has like death being almost like an office place. I've seen this done, and it never gets old for me. It's always just sort of fun to think about, these people who are like grim reapers, or who's, they're supposed to shepherd you to the next part of life, and it's completely bureaucratic. And it's always just, a joy to see that, because I think we've all lived in offices like that. And to think of something as big as life and death as being something as simple as an office is almost comforting in some strange way. But this is a story about a hot mess of a grim reaper. She works for a company called Scythe. What does Scythe stand for again, by the way?
Secure collection, yielding, and transport of human essences.
So Scythe, she works in collections. She's supposed to bring people to the next stage. And she is, just as I mentioned before, she's a complete mess. Kath. She is divorcing, or in the process of separating from her husband Simon, for various reasons, not necessarily good ones. Simon loves her very much, and she is also pregnant with Simon's baby, because she slips up a bit, and maybe the divorce isn't exactly what she wants. But in all of this, she is tasked with bringing this young man, Connor, to the next stage of life, or rather the next stage of death, because he's dead. And Connor is not behaving the way that he's supposed to. Clearly most people, when they die, like it's like there's shock, there's confusion. But Connor claims that he's seen people from Scythe before, which he is absolutely not supposed to have. And Kathy, she starts kind of wondering what exactly is going on, because there has to be something up. So between that, she begins to kind of bond with Connor, who's a really questionable character, but you learn a little bit more about his upbringing and his life, and you start seeing him through Kathy's eyes. She has to start questioning her coworkers, who can't know what she's doing, and figuring out things with her husband while getting ready to have a baby. So much going on here. Let's talk a little bit about where the story began for you.
So it kind of started in two different places. The first is just I've always had a love of mysteries, and I'm always like, what is a new or newer approach? And I think for me, the idea of a representative of death having to solve a murder felt like something I hadn't seen before. The other side of this is that my mom actually is a death doula. So she works with people who are dying, and she supports them and their families. And I think growing up with that gave me a real sense of both curiosity and fear around death. And I think a lot of the reasons why I wanted to write about it in such a humorous and honestly very generic day-to-day way was to answer some questions for myself in a safe environment and hopefully to allow that discussion for other people as well.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm very curious about your mother's work. For those who don't know, I've heard the term before, but what is a death doula?
So if you've ever heard of a birth doula, it's sort of a non-medical midwife that helps people who are giving birth, helps in the emotional side of things, it helps advocate for them. A death doula is the same thing, but at the other end of life. They support the person themselves who's actively going through the dying process, and they also support their loved ones because obviously it's a very difficult time, and that's what she does.
So, Kathy herself, I wouldn't necessarily, say that she's in the right headspace to support anybody in the beginning of this book. How did you kind of put her story together? Like all of the things that she was going through at the same time as meeting Connor. Did you know about the divorce when you started writing her? Did you know about the baby? Did you know about just everything else? What a hot mess she was.
I mean, I think a lot of the hot mess definitely developed as we went, but the baby, I always knew I wanted her to be pregnant because I loved the juxtaposition of this representative of death bringing life. I thought that was a lot of fun to play with. And then in terms of her ex-husband, I feel like there's a lot of rekindling of romances that are very problematic in fiction, and that's something to explore absolutely, but I really wanted to explore something that was sort of the opposite of that. That was two people who absolutely belong together, but are so afraid of that, that they let that get in the way of their love and how they can overcome that. Because that's something that I hadn't really seen before and something that I think for me anyways is a little heartening to be like, okay, maybe maybe there's maybe there's a chance of love out there. So those were definitely elements that I went in knowing. And then the rest of her hot mess just kind of evolved organically.
What about her coworkers? Because that was also very interesting. And just like I guess the inner workings of Scythe, the bureaucracy, like what you were supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, the different parts of it. When did all of that begin to develop? And was there anything that you had trouble working out, or did it all just sort of make sense as it came through?
I was lucky enough that a lot of it kind of evolved organically. I definitely wanted to, again, answer some questions that I feel like are semi-universal. Like, for example, why are so many ghosts Victorian? In my book, just very offhand, I was like, okay, how do I answer this? Well, because they hadn't worked out their system yet in that period. And there was a lot of sort of, cutting corners, and that's why you have so many ghosts from that period. So little things like that where I'm like, "Okay, how do I answer this for myself? How do I answer this for my readers?" And it was weirdly cathartic to be like, "Maybe it's just something like maybe it's a clerical error. Maybe death has clerical errors." So that was definitely a big facet of sort of discovery process for me. And in terms of the coworkers, I mean, the one of my favorite parts about a cozy mystery is getting to bring in some quirky characters. And so I really, really had fun figuring out who populates the other cubicles at an office that deals with death and kind of, yeah, just seeing who came from that.
Did you have a favorite?
Probably Stu, her boss, who is also a mess, but in his own way. He's very much on the surface kind of Jim Bro-esque, but also very like stoic. And he's got a lot of complexity and a lot of grossness, but in a hopefully endearing way.
And in sense of like this being a series, because I believe this is the launch, correct? Will
Correct.
Kathy be the main character throughout, or are you going to sort of rotate whose point of view, whose story gets to be told?
I will be rotating. What I have so much fun with in terms of the setup is there's a lot of room to explore the different areas of site, the different departments and the different roles within it. So book 2, which I'm currently in the process of revising, focuses on a very different character with a very different story and a very different mystery to solve. But I do have plans for Kathy in the future. She's not completely done yet.
What are some of your favorite supernatural series, both book and media, like TV, movies?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. It's such a fun genre to dive into because there's so many different tones and takes. In terms of books, I love the Soulless series by Gail Carriger. Absolutely brilliant, so witty and charming. I also really love the Lockwood and Co. series for a young adult. Oh, you too? Oh my gosh, amazing.
I have to say, I read the first few Lockwood books and I really liked them. And I thought that the Netflix series was great. I was very sad that they didn't continue with it. But I will say that one thing I loved about this book was that it felt a lot like that in a different way. I had, like, just sort of what I really enjoyed about Lockwood. I felt maybe tonally it was different, obviously, but I got the same enjoyment out of the Grim Reaper's Guide to Catching a Killer. But yeah, no, I got just sort of that same just thrill enjoyment that I got from reading Lockwood that I did from reading the Grim Reaper's Guide to Catching a Killer. And even though those two properties are miles apart, I think your love of it shows. So.
Oh, thank you. That means so much. It's funny, I actually didn't discover it until relatively recently, the series, and I was away when I was reading the second to last book, and then I finished it, and I ended up walking 2 hours to get the last book because I needed to know how it ended. That to me is the joy of reading. But yeah, I think those are definitely two book series that I think are absolutely delightful in the supernatural realm. Good Omens is another one. It's not a series, but it's such a fun book and also a TV series now. Yeah,
The,
there's
the
just so
TV
many.
series is amazing.
Phenomenal. And the
Phenomenal, phenomenal.
yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, when can we expect the next?
We're looking at next fall. It's a very spooky season type of series, so we're sticking with that.
Excellent. I urge readers to go check this book out, Grim Reaper's Guide to Catching a Killer. So much fun. You will definitely relate to Kathy in a few different ways. I have to just really put out there, because I thought this was very relatable for me. Just her father said that she had the Sadim touch, which is the Midas touch spelt backwards, which, basically means you're a screw up. And I felt really bad for her. But I also think that a lot of us can really relate to that and just kind of feeling that. And, she really took that to heart, and she was good at what she did. And also Connor, we haven't really spoken much about Connor. He was also problematic in a lot of ways, but he was also just a good person at heart. And the more he grew on Kathy, the more he grows on the readers. And I'm glad you made him messy.
I feel like as messy as death can be, life is tenfold. And I think to me, it's so fun to have heroes that we can see ourselves in. So I really, really wanted that for this book. I really wanted the protagonists to be as human as possible, even though one is a Grim Reaper and one is a spirit.
Maxie, Dara, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.